Morning mist clung to the old chapel walls like grief that refused to lift. Inside, the air felt cold and hollow, every sound too loud, every breath too heavy. Leora Vale knelt alone before the altar, her white gown pooling around her like spilled snow. Her veil hung low over her face, thin as spider silk, yet heavy with secrets she prayed no one would see. She had come seeking quiet and mercy. Instead, she found judgment. Lady Mireth Rowan's voice cut through the silence like a blade. She stood tall in black silk, her eyes sharp with satisfaction as she circled Leora. "She bears the mark of sin," she declared. "What man of standing would claim a woman so clearly ruined?" Around them, a small group of well-dressed witnesses drew closer, hungry for the spectacle. Fans snapped shut. Gloves tightened. Whispers stirred like insects in the dark. "The girl pretends modesty," Lady Mireth continued, "yet we all know what lies beneath that veil." Leora's fingers shook against the cold stone. Her chest tightened, breath shallow and fast. Once, she had been Lady Leora Vale, daughter of a respected baron. Now she was a warning tale, a woman whose bruises told a story no one wanted to hear, yet everyone wanted to repeat. Colored light spilled through stained glass, painting her bowed form in cruel beauty. She had not come to be watched. Privacy, she knew now, was denied to women whose pain amused society. Another voice murmured that she had once been a suitable match. Lady Mireth answered without mercy. No gentleman would risk his name on damaged goods. Leora closed her eyes. The bruises beneath her veil had faded from deep purple to sick yellow-green, but the memory of them remained sharp. They were left by Lord Edmund Blackwood, the man who once spoke of love and marriage, then showed her his rage. She had returned his ring after his hands became weapons. She had chosen safety over silence, and society had punished her for it. Lady Mireth spoke again, pretending kindness. Perhaps the girl should retreat to the country, far from London eyes. Before Leora could shrink further into herself, the heavy chapel doors groaned open. Cold air rushed in, snuffing out candles along the aisle. A voice followed, calm but powerful. "I believe you speak in a house of God, Lady Mireth. One would expect charity here." The room froze. Everyone knew that voice. Duke Cale Vermont of Havenshire. His footsteps echoed as he entered, steady and unhurried. The gathered crowd parted instinctively. Lady Mireth curtsied, all sweetness now. "Your Grace, we were only concerned for the young lady." "Indeed," the Duke replied, disbelief wrapped in a single word. Leora did not look up. Shame burned hotter in his presence. He was everything untouched and admired. His standing was unquestioned. His honor secure. That he should witness her humiliation felt like fate mocking her. "Miss Vale," he said gently, "may I interrupt your prayers?" "Your Grace honors me with his concern," she whispered, the words empty. He stood before her, his shadow falling over her kneeling form. She could see only his polished boots and the dark blue edge of his coat. "I would speak with Miss Vale alone," he announced. Lady Mireth protested, but the Duke silenced her. "Propriety demands that a woman not be made sport for cruel tongues. The chapel will serve as chaperone." Reluctantly, the witnesses withdrew. Lady Mireth lingered, her mouth tight. "This is not finished," she warned. "On the contrary, madam," the Duke replied, "it is finished." When the doors closed, silence returned. Leora remained kneeling, afraid to move. "Miss Vale," the Duke said softly, "will you rise?" "I find kneeling suits my position, Your Grace." "And what position is that?" "That which brings a duke to speak to a ruined woman." He was silent for a long moment. Then, to her shock, he knelt before her on the cold stone. "Miss Vale," he said quietly, "I have known Lord Blackwood since boyhood. His temper is no secret. What happened was not your fault." Tears stung her eyes. Society does not agree. Society is often wrong. He told her then of a letter, one sent by Blackwood, boasting of his cruelty as if it were a skill. Leora felt sick with shame. Then my disgrace is complete. No, the Duke said firmly. His disgrace is, and I will see justice done. Justice, she repeated. There is no justice for women like me. Perhaps, he said, standing and offering his hand, that is what must change. He asked her to walk with him to speak elsewhere. The garden, he said, was empty. After a moment's struggle, she placed her gloved hand in his. The simple warmth of it made her heart ache. Outside, the chapel garden lay quiet, dew shining on stone paths. They walked side by side. He spoke of the letter and of Blackwood's influence. She warned him society would blame her. He agreed, unless she stood alone. I propose an alliance, Miss Vale, he said at last. An alliance with a ruined woman. A marriage, he said calmly. The world seemed to stop. Madness, she whispered. Strategy, he replied. As my Duchess, you would be beyond his reach. Your bruises would condemn him, not you. She recoiled, refusing to be Charity. He followed, explaining he needed a duchess of character, not a flawless debutante. He spoke of courage, of her refusal to submit, of her father whom he had known. Why, she demanded, the truth. Because true nobility is action, not title. Because I believe marriage can be partnership. And because I will not stand by while men like Blackwood harm without consequence. Before she could answer, Lady Mireth appeared, watching with sharp interest. The Duke turned, calm and commanding. Miss Vale has accepted my proposal, he announced. Leora's breath caught, yet when he offered his hand again, she took it. Not from fear, but because for the first time since her bruises were seen, someone had chosen her without shame. As they walked away, whispers followed, but Leora lifted her head beneath her veil. For the first time in weeks, hope stirred, fragile but real, like light breaking through mist. The news spread through London before the chapel doors had fully closed. By evening, every drawing-room buzzed with the same questions spoken in different tones. Had the Duke of Havenshire lost his reason, or had he seen something no one else dared to see? Leora felt the weight of those whispers long before she heard them. They pressed against her carriage window as she rode beside the Duke through the city streets, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The veil still covered her face, though now it felt less like a shield and more like a pause, a breath held between two lives. You may remove it if you wish, he said quietly, noticing her tension. Not yet, she replied. I am not ready for the world to see me. Then it shall wait, he said simply. That small acceptance steadied her more than grand promises ever could. Her uncle's house greeted them with stiff politeness and thin smiles. The man himself nearly tripped over his own words when the Duke announced the engagement. Shock quickly turned to relief, and relief to calculation. By nightfall, Leora understood clearly that her safety now rested not in affection but in title. The following days passed in a blur of legal discussions, settlements, and preparations. Leora listened more than she spoke, learning the shape of her future through contracts and quiet conversations. The Duke never rushed her, never touched her without consent, never once asked her to lower the veil. Yet society did not grant the same patience. Letters arrived uninvited. Some praised the Duke's honor, others questioned his judgment. A few carried thinly veiled warnings. And then, one afternoon, a message arrived bearing a familiar seal. Lord Blackwood wished to see her. Leora's hands trembled as she read it. The memory of his voice, his grip, his anger, rose like a storm in her chest. The Duke noticed her distress at once. You will not meet him, he said firmly. He demands explanation, she whispered. He will not accept this quietly. That is not your burden, he replied. It is mine. Still, the past did not loosen its hold so easily. That night Leora dreamed of chapel stone and lifted veils, of eyes watching and voices judging. She woke shaking, the candle beside her bed already lit. The Duke stood by the window, fully dressed, concern etched into his face. "You cried out," he said. "I feared you were unwell." "I am only haunted," she answered. "Then we shall face the ghosts together." Days later, the Duke acted. Copies of Blackwood's letter, the one filled with cruelty disguised as pride, found their way into careful hands. Men of influence, families who valued reputation above comfort. The response was swift and quiet, like frost creeping across glass. Invitations to Blackwood dwindled. Conversations stopped when he entered rooms. His laughter grew sharp and desperate. He confronted the Duke publicly at a gathering, his anger barely contained. "You think a title makes you untouchable, Havenshire." "No," the Duke replied evenly. "I think truth does." Leora stood beside him that night, her veil finally lifted. The bruise on her temple had faded, but its shadow remained. She did not hide it. Silence fell as eyes turned to her. "This is what cruelty looks like," she said calmly, "and this is what survival looks like." Blackwood left before the evening ended. As the wedding day approached, Leora felt fear mingle with something unexpected: purpose. She spent her mornings planning charitable efforts, shelters for women like herself, places where Bruises would not invite shame. The Duke supported every idea without question. On the morning of the wedding, she stood once more in the chapel. This time, she did not kneel in shame. She walked forward, steady and unbowed. When the Duke lifted her veil, his voice was low and clear. Never again. And she believed him. But beyond the vows and the applause, Leora sensed something still untested. Protection was one thing, partnership was another. As they stepped into their new life, she wondered quietly if strength shared could become something deeper, something lasting. The answer, she knew, would not come easily. The first months of marriage passed in a careful rhythm, like steps learned slowly after a long illness. Havenshire House was vast and orderly, filled with servants who watched Leora with polite curiosity, waiting to see what kind of duchess she would become. She moved through the halls quietly at first, learning the weight of her new title, learning how easily people bowed now, where once they had whispered. The Duke never rushed her into the role. He walked beside her during estate visits, introduced her to tenants by name, and listened when she spoke. In meetings, he deferred to her judgment more often than society expected, and that alone caused raised brows. Leora noticed. She also noticed how he never corrected her in public, never spoke over her, never treated her as decoration. At night they shared dinners filled with thoughtful conversation rather than silence. They spoke of land and labor, of politics and charity, of wounds that did not show on skin. There was distance between them still, respectful and careful, but it was no longer cold. Trust grew in the spaces where fear once lived. News of Lord Blackwood faded slowly but surely. His name became one spoken with discomfort. Doors closed to him, invitations dried up. He blamed Leora loudly at first, then less so as his influence shrank. In the end, he left London for the continent, his pride wounded beyond repair. Leora learned of it one evening as she stood by the window overlooking the gardens. "I thought I would feel relief," she admitted to her husband. "Instead, I feel tired." "That is the cost of survival," he replied. "Strength does not always arrive with joy." Winter came early that year. Snow softened the edges of the world, turning Havenshire into something quiet and reflective. It was during that season that Leora opened the first refuge. A modest house at the edge of the city, staffed by women who understood fear and recovery. The Duke funded it without hesitation, but the work itself belonged to Leora. On opening day she stood before the gathered crowd, her voice steady. "Pain thrives in silence," she said. "We are here to break it." The women who came were careful at first. Some hid their faces. Some spoke only in whispers. Leora greeted each of them personally. She did not offer pity. She offered understanding. Slowly, the house filled with something warmer than safety. It filled with hope. The Duke watched her that day from the back of the room, pride clear in his eyes. Later, as they rode home, he spoke quietly. "You have changed the course of lives today." "So have you," she answered. "You chose to stand beside me." That night, something shifted between them. The careful distance softened. They spoke longer, laughed more easily. When he reached for her hand, she did not flinch. When she leaned into his touch, it felt natural. Healing, she realized, was not a single moment. It was 1,000 small permissions given over time. A year passed. The autumn ball became a symbol of that change. No longer merely a display of wealth, it became a gathering of purpose. Benefactors mingled with survivors. Conversation shifted from gossip to action. Leora moved through the ballroom with quiet confidence, her veil long discarded. Lady Mirith attended, though her influence had waned. She offered sharp smiles and thinner compliments. Leora answered with calm courtesy, no longer needing approval or revenge. As the orchestra played, the Duke offered his hand. "Would you dance with me?" he asked. "Always," she replied. They moved together easily, their steps matched not by practice, but by understanding. As they turned, Leora caught sight of a young woman standing near the edge of the room, her posture tight, her eyes guarded. Fading bruises marked her wrist. Leora recognized herself instantly. She guided the Duke toward her. "You are safe here," Leora told the girl gently. "You are seen." The girl's breath caught. Tears followed, quiet and relieved. Later that night, as the last guests departed and the house settled into stillness, Leora and her husband stood together on the balcony, the cold air crisp around them. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. "Choosing me?" He turned to her, his expression steady and warm. "Never." She believed him, not because of the title he had given her, nor the protection he offered, but because of the way he listened, the way he stood with her when it was inconvenient, the way he never asked her to forget who she had been. Some wounds had faded, others had become scars, but none defined her anymore. As dawn broke over Havenshire, Leora understood the truth she had once been too afraid to claim. She was no longer hiding. She was living. And the promise whispered beneath a lifted veil had become something stronger than words. It had become a life kept,